Oh, when a group of teens shoved a 97-year-old veteran to the ground, it seemed like just another cruel video for the internet. But 30 minutes later, helicopters filled the sky, military vehicles sealed off the block, and soldiers surrounded the teens without saying a word. It happened on a slow Tuesday afternoon in Littlefield, Indiana, the kind of place where the biggest news was the price of peaches at the farmer's market. 4 high school seniors, killing time before practice, spotted the old man outside. Henderson's grocery. He was hunched over on a bench, dressed in a faded army jacket, his trembling hands wrapped around a paper cup of black coffee. They laughed, pulled out a phone. One of them said, "Bet he falls like a bag of bones." Did. The sound of his skull hitting the pavement was sharp and immediate. The phone kept recording as blood seeped onto the sidewalk. The boys were already halfway down the street, swearing and wheezing with laughter, bragging about views and likes. No one noticed the old man whisper a string of foreign words, barely audible. But somewhere, hundreds of miles away, those words reached someone who had been waiting over 80 years to hear them. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the air changed. The skies above Littlefield churned with the sound of Black Hawk rotors. Military Humvees rolled in from 3 directions. Residents watched from porches and shop windows as elite soldiers, not in standard uniforms, but darker, unmarked gear, surrounded the block. They didn't yell, they didn't make demands. They just looked at the teens and waited. Because the man they'd shoved wasn't just a veteran. He was the last living key to something that was never meant to be unlocked again. Wounded and still, the veteran murmurs something no one understands. But someone, somewhere, hears it. The blood pooled beneath his right ear, glistening dark on the cracked sidewalk outside Henderson's grocery. Harold E. Mercer didn't cry out. 97 years had burned the reflex to cry from his bones. He lay on his side, ribs screaming, unable to move, watching the tennis shoes of the boys disappear down Main Street. He blinked once, hard. The world wobbled. A woman gasped from across the street, maybe Mrs. Delaney, the church pianist, but she didn't come closer. No one ever did when phones were out and reputations were at stake. That's what the boys were counting on. Harold turned his head just an inch and tasted metal. With effort that made his jaw tremble, he reached into his coat pocket. His fingers were stiff, numb. The old fabric gave way, and out came a small brass coin the size of a quarter. No one had seen it since 1944. No one even knew he still had it. He clutched it tight in his palm. Then, eyes aimed at the sky, he whispered 6 words in German. Not the kind of German anyone would recognize from a textbook. It was a dialect spoken only by 3 men, all now presumed dead. Until now, Feuer beginnt, wenn das Herz ruft. Fire begins when the heart calls. The coin warmed in his hand. Somewhere inside a sealed sub-basement beneath the Pentagon, a room never mapped, never discussed, a single red bulb flicked on. An ancient console buzzed to life, and a file marked Operation Sable. Eyes only began printing, line by line, on a dot matrix printer that hadn't made a sound since Eisenhower was president. At that exact moment in Littlefield, Harold's eyes fluttered, his grip slackened, and the coin rolled from his fingers into a hairline crack in the sidewalk. He smiled, not wide, just enough to know it had worked. Across town, the first Black Hawk sliced the clouds. Inside the coin's hollow center, as it clicked into the sidewalk's crack, a tiny green light blinked 3 times, then stopped. In a sealed Pentagon sublevel, a dormant terminal flares to life for the first time in 81 years. The sublevel didn't appear on any blueprint. No badge scanned there. No phone rang there. Its existence lived in the margins. Old files, redacted memos, legends whispered among men who never wore name tags. They called it Level Black. At 3:49 p.m., for the first time since August 14th, 1944, power surged through the thick cables that coiled like veins across the floor. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 3 men and 1 woman sat bolt upright in folding chairs, as if roused from deep meditation. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. They hadn't needed to. On the wall, a small monochrome screen blinked. Code 7, heart calling origin point, Littlefield, in key phrase, verified ID, Mercer H731. There was a pause. Not in the room, in the world. As if everything else waited for these 4 people to move. The woman stood first. Her name was Commander Elise Shaw. She hadn't worn her full uniform since her husband's funeral. Her fingers moved fast now, typing into a terminal that was never meant to connect to anything outside that room. Yet it did. Files opened, maps updated, protocols recompiled. Operation Sable had been designed to die quietly after the war. It hadn't. Mercer had insisted on one final contingency, a ghost protocol tied not to a server or switch, but to him, his voice, his living presence, and now that voice had triggered something no one had planned for. "We go red," Shaw said quietly. No one objected. No one asked what it meant. 15 minutes later, a silent signal was sent to an airborne squadron stationed above Kansas. The activation code was 11 digits, no words. The pilot who received it had been trained for this single, impossible scenario. Eyes-only engagement, no public warning, no contact with local authorities. 17 minutes after. Harold Mercer hit the sidewalk. 2 Blackhawks and 4 unmarked Humvees were en route to Littlefield. Inside Level Black, one final alert appeared on the screen, blinking slowly in crimson type. Warning, Sable Key compromised, civilians present. The teens are surrounded, not with guns drawn, but with eyes that have seen too much. Ty Carson was the first to notice the silence. Not the usual kind, not the soft quiet of small-town Indiana, but the heavy wrong kind, like something had shut the world off. He turned his head just as the first helicopter came into view above the Dollar General. "What the hell?" he muttered, phone still in hand. The others, Marcus, Drew, and Seth, were laughing in the alley behind Donnie's diner, watching the video again. The fall, the crunch, the smear of blood. They hadn't noticed the sound of tires skidding to a stop, or the people on the sidewalks standing motionless like statues. Ty saw it all at once. Black vehicles with no markings, no sirens, just matte paint and men stepping out in lockstep. They weren't like National Guard or even police. They didn't yell, they didn't look confused or angry. They were precise, focused, calm, dead calm. Marcus looked up from his phone. Is that the army?" "No," Ty whispered. "It's not." One by one, the soldiers moved in. They didn't pull weapons, didn't issue warnings. They just stood, forming a perfect arc around the alley's mouth. One of them raised a hand, not in greeting, more like acknowledgement, like they already knew who the boys were. Drew backed away. "I didn't even touch the guy. I was just filming." Seth froze, gripping his phone like it could save him. "Why aren't they saying anything?" Ty looked toward the sky. A second helicopter hovered, door open, a figure watching from inside, not with binoculars or a scope, just watching. Then the man in front stepped forward. His uniform had no name, no rank, no flag. He said one sentence. "Which one of you pushed Harold Mercer?" And just like that, they realized this wasn't about a crime. It was about a man, and something none of them understood. Behind the soldiers, out of sight from the teens, a second team quietly retrieved something from the sidewalk crack outside Henderson's grocery, a small brass coin with a faint, pulsing green glow. Between trench memories and buried codes, we begin to understand who Harold is and what he still carries. Harold Mercer lay motionless on a hospital gurney, his skin waxy and gray beneath the fluorescent lights of the mobile field unit that had appeared behind Henderson's within minutes. The paramedic tending to him wore no hospital badge. The room wasn't part of any local medical network. A biometric scanner hovered over Harold's chest, monitoring vitals. A second device, slim, metallic and utterly foreign-looking, was pressed to his temple. He stirred. The medic's hand froze mid-air. "Sir?" he asked softly. Harold's eyes opened, cloudy with age but sharp beneath the film. He coughed, the sound dry and rattling, then whispered something too low to catch. The medic leaned closer. Harold gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Is it activated?" he rasped. "Yes, sir," the man replied. "They came. The code was received." Harold let go and closed his eyes again. For a second, he seemed to vanish inside his own mind, and then, without warning, memories came roaring back. The Ardennes, a church bell ringing through snowfall, fire in the trees. He was 21, terrified, soaked in freezing mud, a radio strapped to his back. But what haunted him more than the war was, after the war, what they asked him to carry, what they asked him to remember. A sequence of phrases, a set of coordinates, a coin. They called it Sable, a last resort, a ghost trigger, built on the ruins of something even darker the Nazis had tried and failed to finish. But America had finished it. And when the operation was buried, one key was left behind. Not digital, not in a vault, but inside one man's mind. They picked Harold because he was quiet, loyal, broken enough to disappear in plain sight. He'd lived 76 years pretending he had nothing left to offer. Now, in the sterile hum of that fake clinic, with soldiers outside and teens in lockdown, the last living carrier of Sable Protocol opened his eyes again. "How many civilians saw it happen?" he asked, voice calm. The medic hesitated. "At least a dozen, maybe more." Harold nodded once. "Then we don't have much time." Just outside the tent, a soldier received a new order via encrypted channel, not to recover the coin, but to detain Harold Mercer and transfer him to an undisclosed location. A buried WW2 era operation, part machine, part myth, is no longer dormant. The soldiers outside the triage tent didn't speak. They stood still, earpieces buzzing, with low static, waiting for the final order that hadn't yet arrived. Inside, Harold sat upright now, IV still in his arm, but his voice steady. His body was failing, but his mind was alert, calculating, remembering exactly how this was supposed to go. Across the table sat Commander Elise Shaw, flown in directly from Level Black. She hadn't seen Harold Mercer in 50 years. Back then, he was a name in a file, a living vault they'd hoped would never be opened. Now he was here, skin paper thin and spine arched with age, and she couldn't look away from the intensity still alive in his eyes. "You weren't supposed to use the phrase," she said quietly. "I was supposed to die before it ever came to that," Harold replied. "And I tried, believe me." He tapped the table once. "But when those boys pushed me and I hit that concrete, I knew. I felt it. Time ran out." She leaned forward. "Do they know what they triggered? They don't even know what century they're in," he said. "They think they filmed a prank." Commander Shaw took a breath, choosing her next words carefully. "We recovered the coin. It's intact." He nodded. "And the receiver? Still embedded?" "Yes, but it sent a signal we didn't recognize." Harold's jaw tightened. "Then it's not just Sable that's been reawakened." For a moment, neither spoke. Wind flapped the canvas walls of the tent. Far above, the chopper's blades beat a steady rhythm that seemed almost like a countdown. Commander Shaw brought out a small tablet. On it glowed a map of the Midwest, Littlefield at the center, with red concentric circles radiating outward. "We have 36 hours before the next tier auto-triggers. After that, we lose control." "You never had control," Harold said. "Sable was never just ours." He reached into the breast pocket of his coat, the same coat he'd worn every Sunday for 20 years, the one no one had ever questioned, and slid out a folded slip of yellowed paper. He placed it gently on the table and opened it. Coordinates, handwritten, shaky but precise. They'll look like kids, Harold said, voice lower now. But one of them, one of those boys, activated more than just the coin. He echoed, "The signal." Commander Shaw narrowed her eyes. "You think it bonded?" "I think," Harold said with something between awe and fear, "it chose." She froze. That wasn't in any of the documents. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Not anymore. And as that realization settled in, a soldier stepped inside the tent with new orders on a slim, encrypted pad. Commander Shaw read them once, then turned to Harold. "They want you detained, effective immediately." Harold smiled, without warmth. "Of course they do," she didn't return the smile. "But I'm not doing that." He looked up, surprised. "I want to know," she said, "if it chose one of them, what happens next?" Harold leaned back, eyes half closed, the beat of the rotor still ticking down in the background. "That's the problem," he murmured. "No one ever figured out what Sable was supposed to do after it chose. Every move the boys make is being tracked, but not just by the military. Something older is awake. The boys had been separated. Ty sat alone in the back of what looked like an old UPS truck, gutted and converted into a mobile holding cell. No windows, no clue where he was. Just cold metal walls and a buzzing strip light that made his skin crawl. His wrists weren't cuffed. There were no threats, no questions, just silence. And the creeping dread that whatever this was, it wasn't punishment. It was processing. Somewhere else, in a room that smelled faintly of ozone and dust, Drew was pacing. They hadn't taken his phone, just disabled it remotely. No signal, no apps. Even the flashlight didn't work. That scared him more than anything. Marcus, meanwhile, was frozen in place in front of a screen. He had been brought into what looked like a trailer, handed headphones, and told only one thing: watch. On the screen, looping over and over, was the video he'd filmed. The push, the fall. Harold's eyes staring up as he whispered something unintelligible. After the fifth loop, Marcus noticed something he hadn't before. Harold hadn't been looking at them when he spoke. He'd been looking past them, over their heads, into the sky, and smiling. In the last room, Seth wasn't being watched. He was being scanned. A machine hummed low and steady, passing an arc of blue light over his chest. The soldier beside it frowned, typed something, scanned. "Again." "What?" Seth finally asked, voice cracking. The soldier didn't answer. In another location entirely, not military, not mapped, a figure sat in a narrow chamber lit only by green phosphor screens. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't with the Pentagon. His fingers tapped lightly against a steel desk as he watched a heat map of the boy's neural activity, fed live from the scanners. One line pulsed differently from the others. "That one," the man muttered. "He's resonating." His voice triggered a reaction. On the monitor, new symbols appeared. Not English, not any alphabet used in modern language. They shimmered, then rearranged into formation. Beneath them, a waveform emerged, pulsing, sinking. He leaned in. "Sable didn't just activate," he said. "It's responding." Back in the trailer, Ty suddenly looked up, shivering. Something was watching him. Not a camera, not a person, something else. It wasn't until the light above him flickered and a line of static buzzed in his ears that he realized it was coming from inside. As the teens try to escape, Harold demands only one thing: that they finally listen. The transport doors opened without warning. No guards, no warnings, just a gust of cold wind and silence. Ty hesitated for half a second before stepping out onto a dirt road lit only by generator lamps. It looked like a junkyard, but cleaner, controlled, as if chaos had been arranged on purpose. Drew stumbled out next, followed by Seth and Marcus, each boy looking equally disoriented. Their eyes darted around at the helicopters overhead, the strange antenna dishes, the looming warehouse at the far end of the lot, and at the man standing between them and whatever came next. Harold. He leaned on a cane now, but he was no longer frail. He was alert, focused, like someone had wound back the years just enough to keep him upright for one last mission. Behind him stood Commander Shaw, arms crossed, watching carefully. "You wanted to leave," Harold said. "Now's your chance." Ty, he blinked. "You're letting us go?" "No," Harold said. "I'm giving you a choice." Drew laughed nervously. "What are you gonna do? Lecture us to death?" Harold looked at him, not with anger, with something colder. "I could have died an hour ago," he said. "And if I had, none of this would have stopped. The helicopters, the scans, the signals. You would have been carried away in pieces, not physically. Data, scraped and studied, until they found out which of you triggered it." "Triggered what?" Marcus snapped. Harold turned toward the warehouse. "Walk with me." They followed. What else could they do? Inside, the building looked nothing like it did from outside. Smooth white floors, holographic maps, rows of machinery that didn't belong to any known time period. In the center of the room was a pillar, about chest high, with a circular indentation in its center. Harold reached into his coat and placed the brass coin into the slot. The room breathed. Light arced across the walls. Symbols rose into the air, spinning, not language, not data, something alive. Harold didn't look at the machines, he looked at the boys. "This was never supposed to be about war," he said. "It was supposed to be about inheritance." Seth stepped back. "What does that mean?" Harold turned to Ty. "When I said the code, this responded to me, but it didn't wake until you stood over me. Until you looked down with fear in your eyes, not for me, but for what you did." Ty shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." "No," Harold agreed. "Not yet." Then he turned to Commander Shaw. "I need 12 hours with them. Alone." She hesitated. "You're not cleared. Neither is this," he interrupted, pointing to the pillar now humming. The boys didn't move. They didn't speak. But something in the air had shifted. None of them wanted to run anymore, and deep down, though they didn't understand it yet, they wanted to listen. Harold reveals the ultimate truth, what Sable truly was, why it was created, and what the boys have unknowingly become. They sat in the warehouse's central chamber, the air strangely warm despite the steel and stone around them. No cameras, no soldiers. Just the 4 boys in folding chairs, Harold in front of them, and the brass coin still pulsing softly in its cradle. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He simply spoke like he had been holding this in for decades. And the words were finally ready to breathe. "Sable was never about defense," Harold began. "It was about continuity." Marcus leaned forward, arms crossed. Continuity of what? Of intelligence, of pattern recognition, of memory. He looked around the room, then directly at Ty. "During the war, we intercepted something we couldn't explain. A signal. It wasn't German. It wasn't Russian. It was older, and it didn't come from anywhere on Earth." The boys exchanged skeptical looks. Drew rolled his eyes. "Come on. I know what that sounds like," Harold interrupted. "But I was there when it first came through. I was the only one who could hear it in sequence. The others, it scrambled them, drove them mad or empty. I held it together, barely." He nodded toward the pillar. "We realized the signal was waiting for someone, a particular brain pattern, a rhythm. That's what Sable was built to find, not to decode the signal, to host it." "So we're all candidates?" Seth asked. "3 of you are echoes," Harold said. "Only 1 is a match." Drew's voice cracked. "For what, exactly?" Harold let the silence stretch before answering. "For the handover." He stood slowly and stepped toward the pillar. As he approached, symbols flowed up from the floor and hovered above each boy, faint glyphs, pulsing differently. Only one of them glowed. Harold faced him. "I didn't choose this. I hoped it wouldn't happen, that I'd die and take it with me, but the signal chose you, Ty shook his head. I don't understand. I didn't do anything. Harold's voice softened. You felt guilt. You saw a man on the ground and knew it wasn't funny. That moment of pain, of empathy, was the doorway. That's what the signal looks for. Not strength, not knowledge, conscience. The lights flickered once. The glyph above Ty's head sank gently into his chest. His breath caught. The world tilted. He wasn't seeing the room anymore. He was seeing something deeper. A map made of memory, blood, and echo. Harold stepped back, face unreadable. It's done, he said. You're the carrier now. The final moment redefines everything. This was never about revenge, it was about inheritance. And now, a new link begins. Ty didn't speak for a long time. The room had gone still. The light above the pillar faded. The strange glyphs disappeared like they had never existed. Only the echo of Harold's words remained. You're the carrier now? Drew looked pale. Marcus couldn't stop blinking. Seth whispered, What does that mean? Ty opened his mouth but said nothing. Harold answered for him. It means the next phase of Sable won't be run by generals. It won't be controlled by protocol. It will follow you. He turned to Shaw, who had re-entered quietly at the edge of the chamber. That's what the architects never understood. The intelligence embedded in the signal. It adapts, it evolves. Shaw narrowed her eyes. So what is it now? Harold looked at Ty. It's him. Ty stood up, unsteady, heart racing. No, I didn't ask for this. I don't want this. You don't have to want it, Harold said gently. You just have to carry it with integrity. Ty backed away. The pressure in his head was building. He could feel something alive inside him. Not a voice, not a thought, just presence. It wasn't controlling him, but it was aware, and it was waiting. Marcus stepped in front of him. Hey man, don't freak out. We're here. No, Harold said quietly. You're not. They all turned. Only he can stay. Shaw said, The rest of you, your memories will fade. That's part of the signal's defense. You won't remember the glyphs or the pillar or what Harold really told you. You'll remember a scare, a lockdown, a mistake you regret. Nothing more. You can't do that, Drew shouted. Harold gave a sad smile. They already have. The soldiers appeared again, quiet as ever, not to arrest or threaten, just to escort. Marcus, Seth, and Drew tried to protest, but already their eyes were glazing, confusion setting, in words slipping away. Ty watched them go, lips parted in shock. I'll forget them too, he asked. Harold shook his head. No, you'll remember everything. That's the burden now, the weight of the code. But you won't be alone. Ty looked at him confused. Why not? Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a second coin, duller, older, and placed it in Ty's hand. Because I've waited 80 years to pass it on. Then, without another word, Harold stepped back. And as the hum of the chamber returned and the machines around them began to pulse again with quiet recognition, Ty felt it. The code was no longer dormant. It was learning, and for the first time, it was curious. If this story moved you even just a little, take a second to subscribe and leave a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from, and what part of this story hit you the hardest? Let's talk in the comments. We're listening.